And it made me think about how often people talk to me about missing the beginning when they couldn't get enough of one another and they had really great sex, and sometimes even how much they missed their partner when they went to the loo. And there's this assumption in society that if you're reminiscing about how good things used to be, it's a sign that things are bad in the present. But what if that isn't always true? You're listening to In Bed with Science, a sex podcast. I'm Lee Noren, a sex therapist with a Master of Science in Sexology and over 12 years of coaching, counseling, and therapy experience. Today, we're talking about sexual nostalgia. How thinking about the best sex you've ever had with your current partner can either spark desire or shut it down. I'm sharing all the ins and outs and a free exercise to help you increase your desire. But first, do you have a sex or relationship question you want to ask, but you're not quite sure where to turn? Now's your chance. I'm looking for thoughtful, personal questions about things like intimacy, mismatched libidos, emotional disconnect, and struggles with sexual pleasure and desire. Specifically, those messy, non-Hollywood experiences that we all have but rarely talk about. And I'll be answering them in upcoming episodes of the podcast with both compassion and scientific insight. Submit your story or question anonymously, or with your name if you'd like, and it might be featured in a future episode. The other day, I came across a study that really stood out to me, partly because of what it found, right? But also because of what it made me think about. So it explored something that we don't often talk about when it comes to sex and relationships, which is sexual nostalgia, or the sentimental longing for past sexual experiences with your current partner. And it made me think about how often people talk to me about missing the beginning when they couldn't get enough of one another and they had really great sex, and sometimes even how much they missed their partner when they went to the loo. And there's this assumption in society that if you're reminiscing about how good things used to be, it's a sign that things are bad in the present. But what if that isn't always true? The study we're taking on board today really shows a different picture, and in a few minutes I'll be telling you the exact moments when nostalgia becomes helpful versus harmful, because that line can be a little tricky to decide for yourself. The researchers found that nostalgia, like sex, is complicated, so it can connect us or it can hurt us, and that largely depends on attachment styles. So before we dig into the study, let me give you two examples of what I see in my practice. So I'll have a client who comes to me and says things like, "We used to have such great sex," or "We were so close back then, I don't know what happened." And right after they say that, there's often this real feeling of helplessness and of shame. And it's as if remembering that good sex from their past is almost like admitting failure and proof that that good part of their relationship is gone forever. So to avoid the pain, they stop revisiting those moments that once filled them with joy. The second is the client who comes in and they've had low desire for quite a long time. Just the idea of sex feels pressuring and stressful to them. It's like they've forgotten that sex can be good, right? So they, in turn, never revisit those good moments. They're simply kind of blocked out of their mind. And here is how this all ties into the study. So today's study is Rose-Colored Glasses, an exploration of the relationship between sexual nostalgia and sexual satisfaction, published in the Journal of Sex Research and written by Thompson et al. Researchers studied sexual nostalgia in over 800 people in relationships, and here's what they found. Sexual nostalgia is real and measurable, so people often reflected on the sensations of past sex. They reflected on the closeness afterward and those small details like sounds and places and atmosphere. It wasn't just about hot sex, but about connection and chemistry and what that sex meant to them. Thinking back on good sex is linked to higher satisfaction. They also found that attachment style matters. So the link was strongest for people with an anxious attachment style who often use closeness to kind of soothe those fears of disconnection or of abandonment. But for those high in avoidance, nostalgia didn't change much, and that's possibly, the authors stated, because they engage less with intimacy and rarely nostalgize at all, but also because, as they pointed out, they tend to have lower desire. But I do have a bone there to pick with them, so more on that later. They also found that too much nostalgia can backfire. So, like all nostalgia, reflecting too much or idealizing the past can create disappointment if your current sex life isn't the same as it used to be, right? Or isn't the same as those memories. So, in struggling relationships, it might even amplify that loss rather than the connection that you could feel when thinking back to that memory. But as you'll hear in this episode, there are ways that I help my clients even when things are tough. So used intentionally, sexual nostalgia could possibly help couples reconnect with what once made sex exciting and intimate and remind them that the spark isn't gone, even if it feels distant. I found it fascinating that nostalgia could both increase satisfaction but also increase a loss if things were already feeling strained in the relationship. And this is one of those points that's important to think about or to highlight because you might be making things worse without realizing that you are. And this actually lines up with previous research showing that general nostalgia is beneficial until it turns into idealization. So when we start to believe that our past was perfect and amazing, satisfaction can decline. And this makes sense, right? And this is something that I've seen when I work with clients too. And in my experience, part of why things can go south when we nostalgize in this way is that if we're already feeling low, and we're people who perhaps are prone to overthink or get stuck in negative thought loops or anxiety, this can really amplify those negative spirals. And in a way, this is just showing us how powerful our beliefs are and how powerful our approach to the things that are going on in our life is. So if we look at those good memories of great sex with our partner as proof that things were better back then, we're going to feel bad. But if our mindset is, look at how great sex was, that means we can get it back, you're obviously going to feel much better. Now, I myself am actually really prone to nostalgia in general, and I think it's interesting how differently I feel that it can hit me sometimes. Sometimes it's like it fills me with warmth, and I feel more connected to the person or the people or the places that I'm reminiscing about. But other times, that warmth is almost laced with a bit of pain, like physically. It can almost hurt in my chest. And that is usually my clue to check in with myself and go, okay, in what way am I approaching these good memories, right? What are my beliefs about these memories? Are they proof that things just aren't as good as they were? Or are they proof that that was a lovely experience or time in my life and I'm better for it? Or it means that I can have those experiences again. I help my clients walk through this too, to understand the perspective that they're coming from. I really do believe it's crucial. So if you catch yourself spiraling here, that's your cue to pause and get curious about why. What way are you approaching these memories? From what perspective and what are your beliefs? What's also really interesting is that the paper found that people high in attachment anxiety showed a stronger positive association between sexual nostalgia and sexual satisfaction. But we don't know if these participants were sexually active or not, because the study didn't require measurements on how much sex they were having. So this means it's possible that some were having zero sex, but that their sense of satisfaction was increased because they reminisced about great sex in the past. It can bring up really positive feelings in the moment. It also often makes them feel better, and some even get turned on by doing that because essentially it's a kind of fantasizing, isn't it? However, a lot of the people I work with either have or veer into anxious attachment, which might explain why it works. But this is the point here too. I've also seen it be helpful for people who are more avoidantly attached to, right? So I have clients who have all different kinds of attachment styles. And maybe that's because it can feel like a safer way to access connection. So you're not being asked to be vulnerable right here, right now with that person. You're just remembering something that once felt good. So while the research says it's most powerful for those with anxious attachment, clinically, I have seen that it can help both, and that it can kind of bring back that warmth and that connection to your relationship, but also to your sex life, and really remind you what you enjoy about the other person, why you chose them. I was saying earlier that I do have a bit of a bone to pick with this study. And if you're anxiously attached, what I'm about to say will probably hit home, because essentially what they were saying in the study is that research proves or has shown that anxious attachment fuels desire, and avoidant attachment usually means lower desire. And as a sex therapist and coach who specializes in low desire, I have had a lot of clients who experience low desire who are anxiously attached. And the research on this isn't as clear-cut as I feel like they're making it out to be. In fact, if you're avoidantly attached, you might find it easier to access your desire if you don't connect so much meaning or emotional gravity to sex, right? If sex isn't a vulnerable moment for you, possibly more a moment of performance or simply getting that physical satisfaction, you might find it easier to experience a lot of desire. If you're anxiously attached, different levels of desire in your relationship can cause you immense feelings of pressure and stress connected to sex, which is what I see all of the time. And that, of course, effectively kills your desire, because who wants sex when they feel like it's an absolute demand of them? So I think while it's interesting to see that some research shows that avoidantly attached individuals are more prone to low desire than the anxiously attached ones, I'd be careful to say that it's definitively the way that it is. And coming up, we're going to be talking about the more practical use of sexual nostalgia, so stay tuned. The researchers said that using nostalgia deliberately to help you remember what once felt pleasurable, both emotionally and physically, might help you if you're struggling with a lack of desire or satisfaction. And here's the thing, I really believe that it can, because I've seen it happen enough times. But, and this is important, nostalgia is a tool, not a time machine. Because what I tell my clients all the time is, it can be detrimental to only focus on what worked before. Sometimes we get so caught up in things that used to get us going, right? So we go back to a memory, we reminisce, and we think, okay, that's it, that's what we've got to recreate. But when we do that, we sometimes completely bypass what might work better for us today. And the reason why these things change is partly just because sexuality is ever changing. So we don't have a stagnant menu of things we get off to. And sometimes part of what we enjoyed before worked better for us in one season of life because of who we were then and what life looked like then. But what you want now and what brings you pleasure and satisfaction and what really sort of gets you going, it just might not be the same. So for instance, maybe sexy lingerie used to be your thing, right? It made you feel desired and confident and really sort of kick-started your desire. But now it might feel neutral. So not necessarily uncomfortable or icky, it just feels like a whole bunch of nothing. It doesn't turn you on or off. And that's a really common kind of shift in your turn-ons. So it's not necessarily because there's a problem, it's just that you've changed. Or you could almost look at it as like your erotic wiring has evolved. Or maybe even the dynamics at work then just don't do it for you anymore. And in those cases, instead of trying to recreate that old feeling through doing those same old things, it can help to instead focus to what does my body respond to today? So maybe that is the feeling of your partner's mouth on your skin, or it's slow kissing, or it's the warmth, the heaviness of your partner's body on top of yours. So it's maybe focusing more on touch and that sense rather than being on display, which you were with the sexy lingerie. So your desire hasn't disappeared, it's just hiding somewhere else within another turn on. And then there are the turn-ons that shift because of turn-offs. So maybe you used to love being blindfolded or spanked, and there was this kind of surprise element and intensity of the feeling of being spanked and that kind of thrill of giving up control and being really submissive. But right now, where you're at in life, you're so stressed, you're so overstimulated during the day that being plunged quite literally into the dark with a blindfold doesn't feel safe enough to relax into. And in this case, the turn-on turns into a turn-off. But because your nervous system is in a state of fight or flight or possibly functional freeze, right? The turn-on has morphed into a turn-off. So instead of recreating that exact same dynamic, you tweak it. So maybe it's about keeping your eyes open, right? When your eyes are open, it feels better, it feels safer. You can watch what your partner's doing, and maybe they're holding your wrists. So there's still that element of perhaps dominance and submission, but there's a bit more safety around it so that it turns you on. So it's like it's the same area of turn-ons, but the way it's expressed is different. And that's really the point. Turn-ons change for lots of reasons. Sometimes because you've changed as a person, sometimes because life just gets in the way and creates problems, sometimes because of changes like menopause and hormonal shifts. And just to be really clear before we move on, this doesn't mean that you should never work on deeper things like stress or overwhelm or emotional pressure. I do that with my clients all the time, and it's really important. But when you don't have the bandwidth for inner work, adapting to what your body responds to right now can almost be seen more as a bridge than a band-aid. So what did people reminisce about when it came to sex? Well, the inventory that the researchers created focused heavily on things like connection and chemistry and affection, what sex meant to them, rather than the explicit physicality. And perhaps this was because all the participants were in relationships of at least 6 months, meaning nostalgia was more about the relational intimacy than sort of novelty or pure arousal. But it left me wondering whether emotional aspects of sex predict satisfaction compared to the purely physical ones. So if you reminisce about having an amazing orgasm during vaginal penetration, maybe that doesn't do much for how connected you feel with your partner or how satisfied you feel with your sex life after reminiscing, compared to whether you reminisce about how connected and in sync you felt with them during a past experience. Or maybe it's a fact that the physicality of the orgasm is overshadowed by how connected you felt to your partner in the moment. So the memory might be the same, but your focus is shifted to the connection piece of the orgasm rather than the physical sensation. What do you think? And that brings me to my final point about this research paper, which is that the researchers highlight how nostalgia differs from fantasy. So they state that it was specifically the reminiscing about past experiences with your current partner that created satisfaction and feelings of connection. And they say that this is different to fantasy, as fantasy can involve anyone or anything, and it doesn't have to be anything you've experienced before, whereas nostalgia is grounded in that real shared experience. However, I firmly believe that fantasizing can include previous experiences. I don't really make that distinction clinically, and I don't necessarily believe you have to. I think for the paper, they possibly had to have that difference embedded in it. But for you personally, I don't think you need to make that distinction. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the idea that we have no fantasies because of this very distinction. But whatever we think about that turns us on is a fantasy and can be used to get our desire going. So if you're the person thinking, I don't have fantasies, you probably do. You've just never framed them that way. So all in all, the study really shows that reminiscing about previous sexual experiences can increase satisfaction with your current sex life, and that this is especially beneficial for those who are anxiously attached. And while we don't have the research yet proving that this is a tool you can use today to access or increase your desire, from my clinical experience, I'd say you can. And it kind of depends on how you use it. So let's dig into this exercise. Now, this is an exercise that I sometimes share with clients and that people find surprisingly powerful. And you can follow along now, or you can download it using the link in the show notes. But it's important to think about this before we dig in. If you're feeling really fragile when it comes to your sex life, notice whether you feel like this exercise would be helpful or if it's just painful. If it's just painful, skip it. Or you can do it later, perhaps with your therapist if you have one. But the point here isn't to do this exercise and make you feel bad. It's to hopefully connect with joy and desire and arousal and your body overall. So let's start. Think back to a time when you and your partner had great sex. If a sexy memory doesn't come up right away, that's normal. Give it some time, pause here if you need to. And as you're thinking of the memory, try to bring to mind what was going on. So where were you? Were you in your bedroom or the kitchen? Maybe even a tent? Think back to what you were doing sexually. So maybe you were giving them oral sex, or you were being stimulated with a sex toy while blindfolded. Or you were having vaginal sex with unbelievably connected eye contact. What can you see? And what could you see then? What could you feel, smell, and taste? Connecting with your senses from that experience will help make it feel more real to you in the here and now, and can also make it easier to remember. Whatever it was that was going on, when you have your memory in your mind, I want you to turn your attention to your present day body. What do you feel in your body as you're thinking about this really hot memory? Do you feel a particular sensation somewhere in your body? So perhaps you might feel warm or tingly or alive, open. Where is that feeling? And what happens when you spend a little time focusing on that physical sensation? This practice of connecting to your body when you're reminiscing is a really good way of noticing desire and arousal, and a way of sort of reawakening it. Because if you're disconnected from your body, and so many of us are in our sort of Western cultures, it's usually hard to want sex at all, because arousal lives in our body. So if you're disconnected from it, it's going to be really, really hard to notice that arousal. Next, notice how you're feeling about your partner. Does it make you feel happy? Does it make you feel connected to them? And if not, and if it makes you feel sad, try noticing what thoughts are coming up that might be causing your sadness. So is it that you're thinking, that was amazing, so we'll never have that again because we don't now? Or that was amazing, but things are always much better at the beginning of relationships, so I may as well kiss that kind of sex goodbye. If so, try reframing that thought with another. Like, for instance, we've had it before, which means we can have it again. Because truthfully, and this is what my experience tells me, the couples that have had great sex in the past can get it back. It's harder when you've never had those fireworks together. And I am not saying it's impossible, so don't worry if not. But it's going to be easier if you know the feeling that you're aiming for with one another because you've shared it in the past. And of course, none of this is a silver bullet, but I want to invite you to take on board that perspective, because it can make it feel more hopeful and make it feel easier to reframe those negative thoughts about previous positive memories. And then once you've connected to your body, see what happens the rest of the day. So do you continue on feeling a little lighter or happier, maybe even aroused? Or does it disappear right away? There are no rights or wrongs here. It's simply connecting to a memory, to your body, and to your partner. And the point isn't to kind of force nostalgia to work. It's just to notice right now how remembering good sex lands in your body today. And if this exercise felt hopeful or like a nice experience, maybe even arousing, that's really helpful data because it tells you that remembering past experiences might be one way back into desire and connection for you. And if it mainly brought up heaviness or distance or pain, that's important data too, right? It means that there's probably hurt and stress and resentment that's blocking your desire. And you're going to need support with that layer before nostalgia can feel helpful. It might even say something about your attachment style too. Either way, those memories don't have to be proof that the best is behind you. They could just point you to what matters to you sexually, what matters to you in a relationship, and what you might want more of going forward. Regardless of what came up for you during this exercise, I want you to know that there's so much more to working on your desire and your sex life, and that you don't have to figure it out alone. So if you feel like you've tried some stuff and it just hasn't worked, or you've never tried anything, never spoken to a sex therapist or coach in your life, but you want that professional guidance, then follow the link in the show notes for details on how you can work one-to-one with me. I'm here, I've heard it all before, and I'd be honoured to support you. That's it for In Bed with Science. Please remember that everything shared in this episode is for informational purposes only and isn't a substitute for medical advice or therapy. For personal support, please reach out to a qualified professional. If you're looking to get your desire back without pressure and stress and have more and better sex, head to leanon.com or click on the link in the show notes to learn more about my one-to-one online program, Redesign. Thanks for listening.